Okay, so chapter 3 is, we're going to do lesson 4 and lesson 5 together. So we're multiplying and dividing integers. So here it says, for the first one, we've got this problem here. Once a parachute is deployed, a skydiver descends at a rate of about 5 meters per second. Where will the skydiver be in relation to the parachute deployed after 4 seconds? So if we're looking at the number here, the distance, it says that he descends at a rate of 5 meters per second. Is that a positive or a negative? He descends.
Negative.
That's a negative. So that's a negative 5, right? So that means that after 1 second, he's gone negative 5 meters, right? Meaning now that negative, remember, you cannot have a negative distance. Remember we talked about that with absolute value. You cannot have a negative distance. But this negative represents the direction that the skydiver is going, okay? So this is a negative 5. So 1 times the negative 5, let's write negative 5 up here. Negative 5 is equal to negative 5. So after 2 seconds, how far how many meters will he be here?
Negative 10.
Negative 10. Very good. So that's negative 10. So 2 times negative 5 gives me negative 10. You see that? So how about 3 seconds? Negative 15. Very good. Now look at this. 3 times negative 5 gives me negative 15. And then 4 seconds, it would be negative 20. Very good. So we can see here that we have, when we're multiplying here, we're multiplying a positive times this negative 5. What am I going to get? Another negative. You see that? So here we've got a negative times a positive is going to give us a negative. Now, this one goes with the shark. It says a great white shark has 3,000 teeth. It gains and loses teeth often in its lifetime. Suppose a great white loses 3 teeth each day for 5 days without gaining any. The shark has lost 15 teeth in all. Okay, so if I'm looking at this, if he loses the teeth, all right, it says he loses 3 teeth. Is that a positive or a negative?
Negative.
That's a negative. Negative what?
3.
Right, so that's going to be a negative 3. And then it says each day for 5 days. So is that a positive or a negative?
Positive.
That's a positive. So that's going to be for 5 days, and that's going to be a positive 5. Right? So we have, if I multiply that negative 3 times the 5 days, that means that he's lost 15 teeth in all. So if he lost 15 teeth in all, when he lost 15, is that positive or negative?
Negative.
That's a negative. So that's going to be a negative 15, right? So when we write the multiplication equation for this sentence, we can see that negative 3 times the positive 5 days is going to be, how many teeth did he lose? Negative 15 teeth. Does that make sense? Okay. So we know that negative 3 times 5 is equal to negative 15. Now, we want to write a division sentence in relation to that, that's related to that multiplication equation. And you remember in elementary school, you talked about fact families, right? This is a little hint I gave you. Do you guys remember fact families? That was like if you did, let's see, if you did 3 plus 5, that's going to give you 8, right? The fact family says that we can change this to subtraction, right? So we can say 8 minus 5 is equal to 3. And we could also say 8 minus 3 is equal to 5. That's your fact family, right? So we can also do that with this multiplication. So let's write this down. We've got negative 3 times 5. And it says here, of course, we figured it out, it's negative 15. Now, if I change this to division, to a division problem, see, because we want to write division sentences that are related to that multiplication equation. So, we can say negative 15 divided by 5 is equal to
3.
what kind of 3?
Negative.
Negative 3. Very good. We could also say negative 15 divided by negative 3 is equal to positive 5. Very good. And in this warm-up, we just figured out our division rules. Do you see it? A negative divided by a positive is equal to a negative. And a negative divided by a negative is equal to a positive. Very good. So those are the division sentences that are related to that multiplication equation. Okay? All right. So let's continue with multiplying integers with different signs. Now, on that warm-up, we just figured it out. The product of two integers with different signs is negative. So we know that a negative times a positive is equal to a negative. Okay? If you want to write these symbols down, that would help. Okay? Now remember that multiplication is the same as repeated addition. So if I were multiplying 4 times negative 3, that means that I'm going to add negative 3 4 times. So negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3. Well, negative 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6, right? And then negative 6 plus 3 is negative 9. And then negative 9 plus negative 3 is negative 12. Does everybody see that? So this shows you, again, that a positive times a negative is equal to a negative. Now, right down here it talks about the commutative property. You guys remember the commutative property? That says that you can multiply in any order you want, right? You can just flip them around. So A times B is the same thing as B times A. So here, 4 times negative 3 is equal to negative 12. Well, if we flip that around, negative 3 times positive 4 is also equal to negative 12. You got it? All right. So, for example here, we have 3 times negative 5 and negative 6 times 8. So, what we're doing, we just figured out the rule, positive times a negative is equal to a negative. Here, positive times a negative, the answer is negative. And then you just multiply like normal. 3 times 5 is 15, the answer is negative. Same thing over here. 6 times 8 is 48, and because it's a positive and a negative, the answer is going to be negative. They have different signs, so the answer, after you multiply, is going to be negative. So here on the Got It problems, we have 9 times negative 2. Make sure you write these down. 9 times negative 2. You multiply like normal. 9 times 2 is 18. And because they're different signs, one positive, one negative, our final answer is negative 18. And that's all there is to it. So here, negative 7 times 4. What's the answer? Negative 28. So now we're multiplying integers with the same sign. Now here, this is the rule. The product of two integers with the same sign is positive. So this one, the same one that we've been doing since elementary school, we have a positive times a positive. You know that's going to be a positive. Very good. And then, same sign again. If I have a negative times a negative, that's going to be a positive because it's the same sign, right? So if it's the same sign and you're multiplying, the answer is going to be positive. the product of two positive integers is positive. You can use a pattern to find the sign of the product of two negative integers. So if we start with 2 times a negative 3, we know different signs, the answer is negative, right? So 2 times negative 3, that equals a negative 6. If I continue this pattern, multiplying times a negative 3 all the way down, and then I reduce by 1, if I subtract by 1, so I'm going to multiply times 2, then I'm going to multiply times 1, then I'm going to multiply times 0, then negative 1 and negative 2, then let's see what happens in our pattern. So we know positive times a negative is a negative. So 2 times 3, negative 3 is negative 6. We know a positive 1 times a negative 3 is negative 3. We also know anything times 0 is 0. So 0 times negative 3 is equal to 0. So these we know are true already, right? So look at what happens from negative 6 to negative 3. How do I get from negative 6 to negative 3? We add 3. How do I get from negative 3 to 0? You add 3. So if I continue adding 3 down through my pattern, then 0 plus 3 is positive 3. And then 3 plus 3 is positive 6. Does everybody see that? So that means negative 1 times negative 3 is equal to a positive 3. Negative 2 times negative 3 is equal to a positive 6. So this pattern shows you that a negative times a negative is a positive. Here are a couple examples. Now remember, we have same sign, the answer when we multiply, it's going to be positive. So negative 11 times negative 9, same sign, positive 99. Negative 4 squared. Okay. What does the exponent mean? Times itself, right? So it's going to be negative 4 times negative 4. So that's negative times a negative is a positive 16. Now look at number 5, example 5. Here we have negative 3 times negative 4 times negative 2. So when I multiply, I'm going to multiply the negative 3 times the negative 4 first. So negative 3 times negative 4 is what? Negative times a negative is a positive. So that's going to be a positive 12. And then I just bring down the negative 2. So positive 12 times negative 2, now it's a positive times a negative. It's a negative. Is everybody clear? I'm going to bring this to your attention. Here, this says negative times negative, right? Everybody see that? Negative times negative. How many negatives are in there? 2. The answer is positive, right? Look at this over here. This says negative times negative times negative. What's the answer? It's a negative, right? What do you think is going to happen if I have a negative times a negative times a negative times a negative? Well, let's take a look. What do you think it's going to be? Let's check. So negative times a negative is a positive. And then over here, negative times a negative is a positive. And then a positive times a positive is a positive. So, for 4 negatives, the answer is positive. What if I had a 5th negative in there? The answer would be negative. So, if you have an even number of negatives, your answer is going to be positive. If you have an odd number of negatives, your answer is going to be negative. All right, so in the got it, remember, same sign when you're multiplying, positive. So negative times a negative is going to give me a positive 48. 12 times 4 is 48. Over here, what does negative 5 squared mean? Negative 5 times negative 5. Very good. So positive times positive, this is going to give me, negative times a negative, this is going to give me a positive 25. Very good. And then over here, we have 3 negatives. My answer is going to be what?
Positive.
3 negative, that's odd.
Negative.
The answer is going to be negative. Very good. So, let's show the work. So we have negative 7 times negative 5. We're going to do that first. So that's going to be a positive 35. And then we just bring down that negative 3. So now we have 35 times negative 3, and that's going to be a negative 105. All right, so Mr. Simon's bank automatically deducts $4 a month maintenance fee from his savings account. Write a multiplication equation to represent the maintenance fees for 1 year, then find the product and explain its meaning. Now, if the bank is automatically going to deduct, very good, $4 monthly, that's going to be a negative. So that's going to be a negative 4, right? That's a negative 4. Now, it also says down here that they are going to charge these fees for 1 year. So if it's for 1 year, how many months is that? 12 months. Very good. So here, that means negative 4 deducted 12 times, right? So that's going to be negative 4 times 12, which is going to give me, perfect, negative 48. Negative 48 what? Dollars. So when I explain the meaning, that means in 1 year, $48 will be deducted from his account. For division, when we are dividing the quotient of two, the quotient of two integers with different signs is negative. So the quotient of two integers with different signs is negative. So that means if I have a negative divided by a positive, a negative divided by a positive, we're going to get a negative. Didn't we figure that out in our warm-up? Very good. Now, different signs, answer is negative. Does that sound familiar to you? It's the same thing with multiplication. If you are multiplying different signs, your answer is going to be negative. If you are dividing different signs, your answer is going to be negative. Is everybody clear? So, let's take a look at the examples. And we already talked about the fact families, right? So you can switch them around. 12 times negative 6 is equal to negative 12. If we switch that around, 12 divided by a positive 2, negative 12 divided by a positive 2, that gives us negative 6. Also, positive 12 divided by a negative 2 gives us a negative 6. You see that? So those were the fact families that we figured out in the warm-up already. So here, when we are dividing different signs, you just divide like normal, and your answer is going to be negative. Negative 55 divided by 11. You just divide like normal, and your answer is going to be negative. Okay? Now, it says use the table to find the constant rate of change in centimeters per hour. So, you guys remember constant rate of change. Remember rate of change, right? Delta y over delta x, right? So, here, the delta y, see the change in height over the change in the hours. So, we want to find that constant rate of change. So, how do I get from 10 to 8, 8 to 6, and 6 to 4? You're subtracting 2 each time. How about 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4? You're adding 1 each time. So when you are looking at your rate of change, you've got the negative 2 over 1. So the constant rate of change is negative 72 centimeters per hour. Okay, all right. Not negative 72, negative 2 over 1. So the constant rate of change is negative 2. Oh, I said negative 2 centimeters per hour. Did that sound the same? So once again, we're dividing like normal. And if I'm dividing different signs, my answer is going to be negative. So 20 divided by 4 is 5, right? Because they're different signs, it's going to be negative 5. You got it? 81 divided by 9 is 9. But since they're different signs, this is going to be a negative 9. And what's the answer for letter C? Negative 5. Very good. Negative 45 divided by 9 is 5. Now, dividing integers with the same sign. Well, you know that a positive divided by a positive is a positive. This also tells me that a negative divided by a negative is also a positive. Please make sure you write down that rule. Does it sound familiar? Again, it's the same rule as multiplication. So, once again, you can do fact families. We already know positive and positive. Here, if I have we already know that a negative times a positive is a negative, right? So this fact family, if I say 20, negative 20, divided by the negative 4, we're going to get a positive 5. So this fact family tells us that we have a negative divided by a negative, we're going to get a positive, right? So if I look at the examples, once again, you're just going to divide like normal. Same sign means that your answer is going to be positive. So 14 divided by 7, that gives me a positive 2. Negative 14 divided by negative 7 gives me a positive 2. Over here, negative 27 divided by negative 3, divide like normal, and the answer is going to be a positive. So that's going to be a positive 9. Now, example 6 is the evaluating. And remember, evaluate means that you are going to substitute and simplify. Okay? So you're just going to substitute negative 4 in for x. So negative 16 divided by negative 4 gives me a positive 4. Okay? Let's do these got it's. So here, once again, when you're dividing integers, same sign, positive, right? So negative divided by a negative is going to be positive. So negative 24 divided by negative 4 gives me a positive 6. You just divide like normal. Negative 9 divided by negative 3 is 3. And then negative 28 divided by negative 7 gives me 4. Very good. Now, for example G, you're going to substitute and simplify. So here we've got A divided by B. If A is negative 33 and B is negative 3. So wherever there's an A, we're going to put negative 33. So this is going to say negative 33 divided by negative 3. Don't forget your parentheses so you can separate those operations and signs. And now you're going to simplify or divide like normal. So negative 33 divided by negative 3 gives me positive 11. All right, the average temperature in January for North Pole, Alaska is negative 24 degrees Celsius. We want to use this expression, 9C, that says 9 times C, plus 160 divided by 5 to find this temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. And we also want to round to the nearest degree and explain its meaning. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we want to write down the expression that they gave us. So the expression they gave us is 9C plus 160 divided by 5. Now, what are we putting in for C? Negative 24 degrees Celsius, right? So in C, for C, we're going to put 9 times C, which is negative 24. And then you're just going to fill in the rest of it. So plus 160 divided by 5. And now we substituted. Now we're going to simplify. So according to our GEMDAS, our order of operations, we're going to do the multiplication. Well, actually, we're going to do our grouping symbols first, right? So the grouping symbol here is this fraction bar. So that means we have to simplify the stuff in the numerator first. And in the numerator, what are we going to do first?
9 times negative 24.
Very good. We're going to multiply first. So 9 times negative 24 is negative 216. And then we bring everything else down. So plus 160 divided by 5. And now we're going to simplify this numerator. So when we're adding integers with different signs, don't forget the rule, we subtract the digits and take the sign of the higher digit.
That equals 270 divided. No.
Subtract the digits
Subtract.
and take the sign of the higher digit. So 216, negative 216 plus 160 is negative 56, and then we're going to divide by 5. So now we can bring that division. So when we do that division, we end up with negative, because it's negative divided by a positive, right? So it's negative 11.2. But up here it tells us that they want us to do what? Round to the nearest degree. Okay, when we round to the nearest degree, that means that we want to round to the whole number, right? Round to the nearest percent means round to the whole number. Round to the nearest degree means to round to the whole number. So we have to go out to the 2, and what does the 2 tell us to do? Stay the same. Very good. So our final answer is negative 11. Negative 11 what?
Degrees Celsius.
Degrees Celsius. Very good. So that, Fahrenheit, thank you. So that tells me that negative, and this is the explanation, see it says explain its meaning, negative 24 degrees Celsius is about negative 11 degrees Fahrenheit.